In this video, we'll go over the basics of HTML for beginning web developers. I want to make sure that everyone understands that this video is for beginners. There are no prerequisites or prior knowledge needed. We're not going to cover any advanced topics in this video. We're not going to get into JavaScript, and you'll see very little CSS in this video. The point is to give you a good foundation and understanding of what HTML is and how it's used. This video is going to be a bit long, so I'll have timestamps pinned in the description below, so if you want to jump to certain parts, you can. Just understand that learning any language takes time. You have to be patient, and it would be helpful if you follow along step by step as I go. I'll include a link below to a download of the code that we'll go over. The first thing that we should talk about briefly is code editors. You can use Notepad on PC or TextEdit on Mac, but these are not meant for extensive code editing. I recommend, and I personally use, Visual Studio Code. If you missed my beginner's guide to VS Code video, you'll want to go back and watch that one first, then come back here. And I'll put a link on the screen and in the description below. What is HTML? It stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and it's the structure of the web page. It's the content, what the user sees, the building blocks of the website. Now, because we won't be focusing on CSS right now, what you'll see in this video is going to be ugly. That's because it's just HTML. The browser will be using its default styling. In the next video, we'll go over CSS, which makes everything look pretty. Right now, we're just worried about the content. Another thing is, HTML is not a programming language. It's a markup language. So there's no logic built into HTML. It's just the structure of the website. So let's go ahead and create a basic blank HTML website. In VS Code, we'll go to Explorer and Open Folder. Go ahead and create a folder and then select it. Next, we'll create an index.html file. Now I'm going to press Ctrl B, and that gets rid of the sidebar. Then I'll type exclamation, enter. In the body, I'm just going to type hello world. We'll go over what all of this is in just a second. Now I'm going to save this by pressing Ctrl S, or you could go up here to File and Save, but you'll be saving a lot, so I would recommend using keyboard shortcuts as much as possible. Try to learn as many as you can as you go. You should also have Live Server installed if you watched the VS Code video. So I'll open this in my browser and move things around so we can see both. HTML consists of elements or tags. So each one of these here are tags. Every tag starts with an angle bracket or less than sign, the tag name, and then another angle bracket or greater than sign. Each element on the page usually has an opening and a closing tag that surrounds its content. The difference between the tags is that the forward slash identifies the closing tag. So here we have the title tag with its opening tag, its content, and then its closing tag with the forward slash. You can have as many tags nested within other tags as you want. So here we see an HTML tag. You can see the opening tag at the top and the closing tag on line 12 at the bottom. Within the HTML tag, we have the head tag. There's the opening and closing, and within that, we have these meta tags and the title tag. So you see there's a hierarchy with them. There aren't that many different types of tags, and there's only a handful that you really need to remember. Now there are some tags that don't have closing tags, and these are considered self-closing, and we'll go over those in a bit. So let's review what we have here. We'll start at the top. The first tag here is doc type. Now this is a declaration that defines the language markup of the document to be HTML. So this tells the browser that this is a web page. The HTML element is the root element of the page. Everything is contained within this element. The first element within the HTML tag should be the head tag. The head element contains metadata, which is information about the document, and it also contains style sheets, which we will get into when we cover CSS. The metadata items are used for SEO, or search engine optimization of the website. I'll add some more relevant meta tags here. The meta tags here for description, keywords, and author are some of the meta tags that Google and other search engines use for SEO. The title element specifies a title for the document. So if I change this and hit save, you'll see the title on the tab of the browser changes. Now besides the title, none of the other items in the head element are visible to the user. This is all in the background. The body element contains the visible page content. This is what the user sees. So let's understand how this works within a browser. So Chrome, i.e. Firefox, Safari, whatever browser you're using, reads the HTML document and then displays the content defined by the HTML markup. So let's add a couple of tags here. So I'm going to add an H1, and then I'll add a paragraph. And I'll hit Control S to save, and you see it refreshes the page, and now we see hello world, this is a paragraph. So when we view this document in a browser, we don't see any of the tags. We see the title at the top, and we see the contents of the body defined by the HTML tags. Next, let's talk about inline versus block level elements. Inline elements don't start a new line. They only take the needed width. So some examples of those are span, image, and anchor. Block level elements start a new line and they take the full width available. So examples of those are div, h1 through h6, and paragraph. Let's talk about headings. So there's h1 through h6. h1 is for main headings, h2 is for subheadings, and then there's 3, 4, 5, and 6, which are for variations of subheadings. So let me show you those. Here's a cool shortcut. If you press Alt, Shift, down arrow, that will duplicate the row that you're on down. So I duplicate that 6 times. And then here's another good shortcut. Control D selects the word that your cursor is on, which is H1, and then it sees all of the other H1. So if I press Control D again, it'll select both the opening and closing H1. So you see there's 2 cursors blinking. So now I have 2 cursors. So I can hit backspace H2, and then I can just go down. I still have 2 cursors. I'm just moving them around with the arrow keys. 4, 5, and 6. So now I hit Control Save, and we'll see that that refreshes. Users generally skim the page and just look at the headings. Google also uses your top headings for SEO. So it's important to use headings properly. Don't use them to make text within other elements bigger or bold. There are other ways to do that, which we'll get to. Now the style and the sizes that you see here are the browser defaults. And these can all be changed and customized later with CSS, which will be in the next video. The P tag identifies paragraphs, which are block level elements, and it adds spacing before and after the block of text contained within. Browsers will remove any extra spaces and extra lines. So I can add lines and the browser doesn't care. It only sees it as one space. So if I go here and add a couple of lines and then save it, you'll see nothing changed. Even if I start typing and then save, you'll see it just adds it right after the other. So if we wanted to add a line break, we could use a BR tag. Now this is a self-closing tag that I was talking about earlier. BR tags are line breaks. BR tags have no content, so there is no reason for closing tags. If I hit save now, you'll see it goes down to the next line. And if I move this back here and then hit save, you'll see it still looks the same. Let me show you another cool feature of VS Code. So when you're mocking up a web page, a lot of times you don't have the actual content. So you'll want to just use some fake data. So you can actually just type lorem and hit tab. That will give you a block of text that you can put in there as a filler. So now what I want to do is I want to highlight this paragraph, and I'm going to use Alt Shift down again to duplicate it a couple of times just to show you what the paragraph looks like on the web page. So you see there's padding here or spacing between the paragraphs. Let's now talk about some other ways that we can format the text within the web page. So here we could do a strong tag. Strong identifies the text as important. Now in the web browser, you'll see that it makes it bold. It may act a little differently on a screen reader, but strong identifies it as important. Another one is EM. EM is for emphasis. So we see here in the browser, it italicized that word. You may come across tags like B and I. Now if I change those to B and I, you'll see that it looks the same. B is for bold and I is for italic. The B and I tags are not semantic and they should not be used anymore. Stick with strong and EM. Another example is mark. Mark highlights the text. And another one is small. You can see there it makes the text smaller. Another one is del for delete. And you can see there it adds strike through. Next one we'll look at is INS insert. and insert adds an underline. Then we have sub for subscript, and then sup for superscript. So all these tags are inline elements, different ways to format the text. Now let's talk about div tags. I'm going to wrap this in a div tag, div. A division element defines a section in the document, and it's block level. It's a general purpose container and helpful in separating and identifying groups of elements. And then we have a span tag. So let's add a span in here. So span tags defines a section in a document inline. So then if I wanted this entire section here to be formatted differently, in CSS I could grab onto the span tag and then format it as needed. You'll see after adding the div tag and the span tag, nothing has changed on the website. These are identifiers that we can use later on in CSS or JavaScript. We talked about this briefly earlier. Elements within other elements, so nested elements. There's no limit to how many nested elements there can be, but we need to keep track of where we are and the use of closing tags in the correct order. So for short lines like this, one line is okay, but for longer lines, you'll want to break it up to keep track. So see here where I have the div tag, and then we go to a next line, indent over, and now we've got our paragraph, and then next line, paragraph, next line, paragraph, and then back to our div tag, which then is outdented once to line up with the opening div tag. So on this H1, if the text was longer on this H1, what I would do is return there and then bring this H1 down like that. It makes it easier to read. Another self-closing tag is an HR tag. It stands for horizontal rule. Save that. You see it just draws a line across the page. It's a way to separate sections of the web page. Next, let's talk about attributes. Attributes are used to provide additional information about HTML elements, and they are defined in the opening tag. They are key value pairs. So let me show you an example. On this paragraph tag, we can add a title attribute. Now when we look at the website, it looks the same, but if I hover over this paragraph, you'll see the tooltip pops up, the title. This is a tooltip. There are many different attributes for various tags, and we'll go over a few. So these are in key value pairs. So the key is the title, and the value is, this is a tooltip. The value should always be wrapped in quotation marks. Now you can use single or double quotation marks. Double is most common, unless for some reason within the text you need double quotes. You see how that really messes it up. It sees the opening quote and then it sees this one as a closing quote, and then it's not sure what to do with the rest of them. So in this instance, we would want to use single quotes to open and close the entire value. Next, let's talk about image tags. So something I haven't showed you yet is another shortcut. If I just type img and then tab, VS Code automatically creates the image tag for me, and you can do that with any tag. So let me open up the sidebar by pressing Ctrl B. You'll see here that I added an image to our project folder. So in the source attribute, I'm going to type the file name, and then I'll save that, and you can see what that looks like. It's a very large image and is not scaled very well to the website. We'll fix that in a minute. The alt attribute is a description of the image and is used by screen readers to improve accessibility and is displayed if the image fails to load. And if the image is purely decorative, then an empty alt attribute is fine. So another attribute that we can add is width. There we go. That looks much better. Now, when you're adding images, you obviously would like to start with a size that is close to what you're looking for. Depending on how many images you have and their sizes, the website could take longer to load. Next, we'll talk about anchor tags. Anchor tags create hyperlinks to content outside of the current page or within the current page. It could be other pages on your website or a completely different site altogether. Let me show you an example. A basic anchor tag has an href attribute. Href is the destination. If you just type in number symbol or hashtag, that just means it's not going to go anywhere. It's going to stay on the current page. Or we could type in google.com, and then the text of the tag is what the user will see and what should identify to the user where this tag will take them. Now the image tag is an inline element, so for the purposes of this video, I'm going to add a line break here and bring that link down a line. If I click on Google, it's going to take us to Google's webpage. Notice that it stayed within the same tab in Chrome. If you're going to link to an external web page, you don't want it to navigate away from your website. So what we can do is I'll go back and we can add another attribute here that is target. And the target would be _blank. And what that does is when we click on Google now, it's going to open a new blank tab for that URL. And we still have our website up as well. So anchor tags can be placed anywhere, even nested within other elements. They are inline as well. I could even wrap this anchor around this image tag. And now we see there's really no indication that there's a link here though, but when I hover over the image, the cursor does change. So if I click on it, same thing happens, it goes to Google. Now to add a bookmark link within a page, we could create another paragraph and we could add an ID attribute. An ID attribute is a unique identifier for an element. Now what we could do on this anchor tag is we could replace Google with hashtag bookmark. A hashtag identifies it as an ID. And then we'll want to remove the target blank because we're within the same web page. We don't want to create multiple tags when navigating to portions of the current web page. Now because the paragraph is right there underneath the image, we need to move that down just for the demonstration purposes here. So I'm going to press Alt-Shift down on this break and then I'll save that. And now you can see we have the paragraph down here. So if I scroll up, and now if I press the image, it will then navigate me down to my link. So we'll get rid of all of these. Next we'll talk about lists. There are unordered lists, which are bullet points. And then there are ordered lists, and these can be numeric or Roman. An example here is UL is unordered list, and then LI is the list item. So we'll say list item 1. Save that. And you can see there's one bullet point, list item 1. And if I press Alt-Shift down, duplicate this a couple of times, we'll change these. And now we've got some list items. I can change the UL to an OL, unordered list, to an ordered list. Save that, and now we've got numbers. An attribute that we can add to an OL is type. And the type can be 1, which would be numeric. Capital A would be capital letters. I would be capital Roman. Lowercase a and lowercase I. I could change this back to a number. And then another attribute is start. And I could start with whatever number I would like. And we can also nest lists. So within this OL, I could have a UL. And there we've got some sub-bullets. When you see a navigation at the top of a web page, those are usually lists. And in my CSS video, we'll go over how to style a list as a navbar. Next, we'll talk about tables. The table element was not designed to be a layout tool. In the 90s, that's what it was used for, but today, we use CSS. The purpose of the table element is to display tabular data. So let's show you an example of a table. First we have our table tag, and then we have a table head. Next we'll want a table row, and then the table headings. In this table we'll have 3 headings. So Alt-Shift down twice, and we'll do first name, last name, and age. So there's 3 columns there. Next we'll add the table body. And then again within the table body we'll want to start a table row, and then we'll have table data. Again there's 3 columns, so we'll make 3 table data columns there, and we'll just do Jill Smith, and she's 25. And we'll just take this row here and we will duplicate that, Alt-Shift down, and we'll change this to Eve Jackson and she is 35. Save that. I'm just going to add a bunch of line breaks here just to make it easier to see for you guys. I'm just adding these breaks for the demonstration of this video. When it comes to spacing and layout, you'll always want to use CSS. Don't use line breaks for the layout of your website. You see here on the web page now we have our table. It looks ugly, but again, this is the browser styling. There's no CSS involved here, so this is what the default styling of the table looks like in HTML. Another thing that we could do here is we'll add another table head, and table row. This time we'll add name and telephone. And this time we'll add an attribute of call span, this column span, and we'll say 2. I'll show you what that does in just a second. Now we'll add the table body, and a table row, and now the table data. Now there's only 2 columns in the header, but one of those header columns spans 2. So there's actually 3 columns. So we'll need to add 3 columns of data. So here we'll do Jill Smith again, and her first phone number, and then a second phone number. And we'll save that, and you'll see that there are 3 columns. There's Jill Smith and 2 phone numbers, but the telephone column in the header spans those 2 telephone columns. So instead of saying name, telephone, it's just 1. And we can do things a little bit differently here on rows. Let's add a table, and then instead of a table head and a table body, we're just going to go straight to a table row, and then we're going to add a table header here on the row. And this will be name. And then we're going to add table data here of Jill Smith. And then we'll add another row and another table header. And this will be telephone again. This table header is going to have a row span of 2. And now we'll add some more table data, and that will be the phone number again. Now in the next row, there's only going to be 1 table data, and that is the second phone number. Let's save that and see what that looks like. So with this instance, we put our table headers on the left side going down the column. 2 telephone numbers are on their individual rows, but the telephone header spans 2 rows. Let's go back up here to this first table. Something that we could add to any table is a caption. And that just adds a title or caption to the top of the table. And next we'll talk about forms. So you can build a form within HTML that will submit data to a server without using any code other than the HTML. To do this, we'll need a form element. And the action attribute identifies where the form is going to submit the data to. This will require a server on the other end that will accept this data. One tag that we could add is field set. And this is used to group related elements in a form and draws a box around those elements. And within the field set, we can add a legend. And this defines the caption for the field set. And we could do first name. We'll add a line break here. And then we'll add an input. The attribute type is going to be text. This is going to be a text input. We're going to name this input first name. The name attribute will get sent to the server, so the server will identify this input as first name. Another attribute that we can add is value. Generally, you won't know the value right off, so it can be blank, or you don't even have to add the attribute. After this, we'll add another line break, and then we'll do last name. Line break, input, name of this will be last name. Value blank. Then we're going to add 2 line breaks to add some spacing for our next input, which is going to be a submit. And this one will have a value of submit. So this is going to be a button. So the value there is what the user is going to see on the button, the label of the button. Let's save this and see what we have. This is getting a little messy here, so I'm going to add another horizontal rule, and we can add some breaks before and after. Again, I'm just doing this for the purposes of this video. Any alterations to the layout should be done in CSS. So now we see this form here. Not that bad given this is just HTML. And if we hit submit, you'll see we get an error because that was not an actual server that it was pointing to. Let's go back to our form here and we'll go into a little more detail on these elements. So these text inputs, we could add another attribute called placeholder. We can add a hint or a placeholder for the user when they're filling it out. They know first name goes here. When you click on it and start filling it out, that placeholder goes away. The placeholder text is to help the user understand what they are to type into the field. It should contain a description or example. Next, let's add some radio buttons. So radio buttons are a way to give users multiple options to choose from, but they can only pick one. So this is an input. The type here will be radio. And we'll name this options. Then after the radio, we'll say option 1. Alt-Shift down to duplicate that. This will be option 2. Now with radio buttons, they are in groups, so the names will be the same. When the data is sent to the server, it will send the server the options value that is selected. So now we have option 1 and option 2. You see we can only pick one. We'll add a line break here and then we can add another input which will be a checkbox. So checkbox is very similar to radios, but you can select multiple. And we'll name this checkboxes. And checkbox 1, and then we'll duplicate that, and this is checkbox 2, and we can add another one, checkbox 3. Save that, and so now we've got some checkboxes. They can all be checked, unchecked. Now checkboxes and radios have an attribute that we can add that is checked. Now this attribute is different than most because it doesn't have a value. So if we save that, we can see that on reload of the web page, by default, this checkbox is checked. Now I can still uncheck it, but if I reload the page, we'll see that it's checked. All right, we'll add a line break after that one, and we'll move on to select. So selects are a drop-down list. We'll add a select tag, and we'll name this cars. Now within a select, we'll need to add options. And an option will have a value. So we'll say BMW is the value. And then what the user sees, the text will be BMW. Alt-Shift down to duplicate that a couple of times. And now here's another shortcut to change two identical words or phrases. I can press Ctrl D to select that first BMW where the cursor was, and then I can press Ctrl D again to select the next instance. And I can continue pressing Ctrl D to select all of them if I'd like. But I just want those two selected. Now I have two cursors, and I can change that now to Volvo. And then I could do the same thing here on this one. Select those two by pressing Ctrl D, and we can do Audi. Alright, so let's save that and see what we have. So we see our select menu here. BMW, Volvo, Audi. Now our select probably needs some kind of identifier. We could just type in select, save that, and now we'll have select as our label. But there is actually a better way. We could add a label tag and then say select. But with the label tag, you're going to want the for attribute. This tells the label what element this label is for. This uses the inputs ID attribute. Currently our select doesn't have an ID, so we'll add one. We'll name this car select. So we'll add the ID here. Same, car select, save. And you'll notice now that it looks the same. It didn't change, but this is the proper way to lay out a label and a select menu or any other input. It should be a label and then the input. Now with the select menu, there is a couple of other attributes that we can add. So on the select, we could add multiple. Now this again is an attribute with no value. When we add multiple, Let me save that. Now we can actually see that by holding the Control key, we can select multiple options. And then on the options, we can add a selected attribute. So now by default, when the page is loaded, BMW is selected. I can unselect it, of course, but by default, it is selected. So now if you're using a CSS framework like Bootstrap, there are different ways of laying out forms and inputs and labels. We'll go over that in future videos. Alright, so the next thing we'll look at is a button. So I save this and you see the button click me and it doesn't do anything. So in order to make the button do something, we would have to incorporate some JavaScript. So we're not going to get into that in this video. Let's talk about some general guidelines. First, we'll want to use lowercase element names. So for a div tag, it would be lowercase div. We also want to use lowercase attribute names, and as well lowercase file names. And when it comes to names, classes, and IDs, I would suggest using camel case. It starts with lowercase and then every word after that is uppercase. It makes it easy to read and identify. There should be no spaces before or after the equal sign in attributes. So title equals quotation my title. Avoid long lines of code. So for long lines of code, you'll want to break them up, put them on multiple lines, make them easier to read. Don't add blank lines without a reason. Blank lines should be to separate large or logical code blocks for readability. Indent your code 2 or 4 spaces, whatever your preference is. So each line of nested code should be indented 2 or 4 spaces more than the previous line. Be sure to close your tags in the proper order. So here we have a paragraph and then a strong, the text, and then the closing paragraph and closing strong are in the wrong order. It should be paragraph, strong, text, closing the strong, and then closing the paragraph. So now let's talk about commenting. The method of commenting in code is different in just about every language. So in HTML, it starts with an angle bracket or less than symbol, exclamation, hyphen, hyphen. And then within that, we can add our comment. So here I'll add headings. So commenting is a way to keep track of your work and let others know what the code you have written is for. Commenting is also a convenient way to temporarily make code inactive while testing. So if I wanted to make this line inactive, in VS Code, I can actually press Control ? And that will automatically comment this line out. So let me save this and show you what that looks like. So now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The first heading is gone, and we don't see this headings comment either. So comments are not viewable on the web page. They're only here in the code for the developers. So now if I want to uncomment this line, I can again press Control ? and that will be uncommented. Hit save, and now it's back. So let's clean this page up a bit. Let's add some comments in here. I can do paragraphs, and then press Control ? and it'll comment it out for me. I can do image and bookmark. Let's take this BR out, and let's move this bookmark down to the bottom now. And these are our list examples, table examples. Again, that's Control ? to comment in VS Code. Here we have our form example. Button. And bookmarked paragraph. And we can save. So between our tables, let's add another horizontal rule and some breaks just to make it look a little bit better. Again, use CSS for any spacing and layout. Now, as I've mentioned, we're not going to get into much CSS in this video, but I do have to show you a couple more attributes that we haven't gone over. So I'm going to go up here to this span that's within this paragraph here. And an attribute that we can add is style. Now, style uses CSS. So within this attribute, we can add property of color, colon, and then a color. So let me save that. Now you can see that span over here, the color of the text has turned red. So you can add CSS styling directly to any HTML element. Although you can do this, I don't recommend styling your page within the HTML markup. It's much better to include your CSS styling in a separate CSS style sheet. A style sheet would be defined in the head, and that would be a link. So here you would put your style.css file, which we don't have currently, but that is where it would go. Another way to do that is you can add a style tag in the head. Within here, you can add CSS styles to elements. We can add a class in here. Classes start with a dot. We'll do dot background. And then you'll add curly braces. And then within there, we'll add our styles. So we will change the background color to black. And then the font color, which is just color, to white. So now we've created a class here that defines the background as black and the color of the font as white. Now what we can do in HTML is we can go down to this last paragraph here. On this paragraph, we can add an attribute of class. And then within class, we will add that class name of background that we created. So we'll save this, and you'll now see that this paragraph, the background has turned black and the text is white. So that's all that we'll go over in this video. I will have more advanced videos where we'll more thoroughly cover some of these elements, such as forms and tables. Let me know in the comments below which elements you want to learn more about. Again, I'll include a link below to a download of the code we used in this video. As always, if you liked this video, a thumbs up is appreciated. Subscribe and hit the bell. Thanks for watching.